Section 3 of the Vedanta Sutras by Badarayana, with a commentary by Sankaracharya, Volume 1, translated by George Thibault. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Introduction, Part 3. First Adhyaya, Pada 1. The first 5 Adhikaranas lay down the fundamental positions with regard to Brahman. Adhikarana 1 treats of what the study of the Vedanta presupposes. Adhikarana 2 defines Brahman as that whence the world originates, and so on. Adhikarana 3 declares that Brahman is the source of the Veda. Adhikarana 4 proves Brahman to be the uniform topic of all Vedanta texts. Adhikarana 5 is engaged in proving by various arguments that the Brahman, which the Vedanta texts represent as the cause of the world, is an intelligent principle and cannot be identified with the non-intelligent pradhana from which the world springs according to the Sankhya's. With the next Adhikarana there begins a series of discussions of essentially similar character, extending up to the end of the first Adhyaya. The question is throughout whether certain terms met with in the Upanishads denote Brahman or some other being, in most cases the jiva, the individual soul. Shankara remarks at the outset that, as the preceding 10 sutras had settled the all-important point that all the Vedanta texts refer to Brahman, the question now arises why the enquiry should be continued any further, and thereupon proceeds to explain that the acknowledged distinction of a higher Brahman, devoid of all qualities, and a lower Brahman, characterized by qualities, necessitates an investigation whether certain Vedic texts of prima facie doubtful import set forth the lower Brahman as the object of devout meditation, or the higher Brahman as the object of true knowledge. But that such an investigation is actually carried on in the remaining portion of the first Adhyaya appears neither from the wording of the sutras nor even from Shankara's own treatment of the Vedic texts referred to in the sutras. In 1.1.20, for instance, the question is raised whether the golden man within the sphere of the sun, with golden hair and beard and lotus-colored eyes, of whom the Chandogya Upanishad speaks in 1.6.6, is an individual soul abiding within the sun or the highest Lord. Shankara's answer is that the passage refers to the Lord, who, for the gratification of his worshippers, manifests himself in a bodily shape made of Maya, so that according to Shankara himself the alternative lies between the Saguna Brahman and some particular individual soul, not between the Saguna Brahman and the Nirguna Brahman. Adhikarana 6 raises the question whether the Anandamaya mentioned in Taittiriya Upanishad 2.5 is merely a transmigrating individual soul or the highest self. Shankara begins by explaining the sutras on the latter supposition, and the text of the sutras is certainly in favor of that interpretation. Gives, however, finally, the preference to a different and exceedingly forced explanation according to which the sutras teach that the Anandamaya is not Brahman, since the Upanishad expressly says that Brahman is the tail or support of the Anandamaya. Ramanuja's interpretation of Adhikarana 6, although not agreeing in all particulars with the former explanation of Shankara, yet is at one with it in the chief point, namely, that the Anandamaya is Brahman. It further deserves notice that, while Shankara looks on Adhikarana 6 as the first of a series of interpretatory discussions, all of which treat the question whether certain Vedic passages refer to Brahman or not, Ramanuja separates the Adhikarana from the subsequent part of the Pada and connects it with what had preceded. In Adhikarana 5, it had been shown that Brahman cannot be identified with the pradhana. Adhikarana 6 shows that it is different from the individual soul, and the proof of the fundamental position of the system is thereby completed. Adhikarana 7 demonstrates that the golden person seen within the sun and the person seen within the eye, mentioned in Chandogya Upanishad 1.6, are not some individual soul of high eminence, but the supreme Brahman. Adhikarana 8 teaches that by the ether from which, according to Chandogya Upanishad 1.9, all beings originate, not the elemental ether has to be understood, but the highest Brahman. Adhikarana 9, the prana also mentioned in Chandogya Upanishad 1.2.5, denotes the highest Brahman. Adhikarana 10 teaches that the light spoken of in Chandogya Upanishad 3.13.7 is not the ordinary physical light, but the highest Brahman. Adhikarana 11 decides that the prana mentioned in Kaushitaki Upanishad 3.2 is Brahman. Pada 2. Adhikarana 1 shows that the being which consists of mind, whose body is breath, etc., mentioned in Chandogya Upanishad 3.14, is not the individual soul, but Brahman. The sutras of this Adhikarana emphatically dwell on the difference of the individual soul and the highest self, whence Shankara is obliged to add an explanation, in his comment on Sutra 6, to the effect that that difference is to be understood as not real, but as due to the false limiting adjuncts of the highest self. The comment of Ramanuja throughout closely follows the words of the sutras. On Sutra 6, it simply remarks that the difference of the highest self from the individual soul rests thereon that the former, as free from all evil, is not subject to the effects of works in the same way as the soul is. Adhikarana 2 decides that he to whom the Brahmins and Kshatriyas are but food is the highest self. Adhikarana 3 shows that the two entered into the cave are Brahman and the individual soul. Adhikarana 4 shows that the person within the eye mentioned in Chandogya Upanishad 4.15.1 is Brahman. Adhikarana 5 shows that the ruler within, Antariman, described in Brihadranayaka Upanishad 3.7.3 is Brahman. Sutra 20 clearly announces the difference of the individual soul and the Lord. Hence, Shankara is obliged to remark that that difference is not real. Adhikarana 6 proves that that which cannot be seen, etc., mentioned in Mundaka Upanishad 1.1.3 is Brahman. Adhikarana 7 shows that the Atman Vaishvanara of Chandogya Upanishad 5.11.6 is Brahman. Pada 3. Adhikarana 1 proves that that within which the heaven, the earth, etc. are woven is Brahman. Adhikarana 2 shows that the Bowman referred to in Chandogya Upanishad 7.23 is Brahman. Adhikarana 3 teaches that the imperishable in which, according to Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 3.8.8, the ether is woven is Brahman. Adhikarana 4 decides that the highest person who is to be meditated upon with the syllable Om, according to Prasna Upanishad 5.5, is not the lower but the higher Brahman. According to Ramanuja, the two alternatives are Brahman and Brahma. Jivas samashtirupas katurmukha. Adhikarana 5 and 6, comprising, according to Shankara, Sutras 14 through 21, discuss the question whether the small ether within the lotus of the heart, mentioned in Chandogya Upanishad 8.1, is the elemental ether or the individual soul, or Brahman, the last alternative being finally adopted. In favor of the second alternative, the Purvapakshin pleads the two passages Chandogya Upanishad 8.3.4 and 8.12.3 about the serene being, Samprasada, for by the latter the individual soul only can be understood, and in the chapter of which the latter passage forms part, there are ascribed to it the same qualities, namely freeness from sin, old age, death, etc., that were predicated in 8.1 of the small ether within the heart. But the reply to this is that the second passage refers not to the ordinary individual soul, but to the soul in that state where its true nature has become manifest, that is, in which it is Brahman, so that the subject of the passage is in reality not the so-called individual soul, but Brahman. And in the former of the two passages, the soul is mentioned not on its own account, but merely for the purpose of intimating that the highest self is the cause through which the individual soul manifests itself in its true nature. What Ramanuja understands by the Avirbhava of the soul will appear from the remarks on 4.4. The two next sutras constitute, according to Shankara, a new Adhikarana, proving that he, quote, after whom everything shines, by whose light all this is lighted, end quote, is not some material luminous body, but Brahman itself. According to Ramanuja, the two sutras do not start a new topic, but merely furnish some further arguments strengthening the conclusion arrived at in the preceding sutras. Adhikarana 8 decides that the person of the size of a thumb, mentioned in Kata Upanishad 2.4.12, is not the individual soul, but Brahman. The two next Adhikaranas are of the nature of a digression. The passage about the Angushtamatra was explained on the ground that the human heart is of the size of a span. The question may then be asked whether also such individuals as belong to other classes than mankind, more particularly the gods, are capable of the knowledge of Brahman, a question finally answered in the affirmative. This discussion leads in its turn to several other digressions, among which the most important one refers to the problem in what relation the different species of beings stands to the words denoting them. In connection herewith, Shankara treats of the nature of words, sabda, opposing the opinion of the Mimamsaka Upavarsha, according to whom the word is nothing but the aggregate of its constitutive letters, to the view of the grammarians who teach that over and above the aggregate of the letters there exists a supersensuous entity called sphota, which is the direct cause of the apprehension of the sense of a word. Adhikarana 10 explains that Sudras are altogether disqualified for Brahma Vidya. Sutra 39 constitutes, according to Shankara, a new Adhikarana, proving that the prana in which everything trembles, according to Katha Upanishad 2.6.2, is Brahman. According to Ramanuja, the sutra does not introduce a new topic, but merely furnishes an additional reason for the decision arrived at under Sutras 24-25, namely, that the Angushtamatra is Brahman. On this supposition, Sutras 24 through 39 form one Adhikarana, in which 26 through 38 constitute a mere digression led up to by the mention made of the heart in 25. The Angushtamatra is referred to twice in the Katha Upanishad, once in the passage discussed, and once in 2.6.17, quote, the person not larger than a thumb, end quote. To determine what is meant by the Angushtamatra, Ramanuja says, we are enabled by the passage 2.6.2.3, which is intermediate between the two passages concerning the Angushtamatra, and which clearly refers to the highest Brahman, of which alone everything can be said to stand in awe. The next sutra gives rise to a similar difference of opinion. According to Shankara, it constitutes by itself a new Adhikarana, proving that the light, Jyotis, mentioned in Chandogya Upanishad 8.12.3 is the highest Brahman. According to Ramanuja, the sutra continues the preceding Adhikarana and strengthens the conclusion arrived at by a further argument, referring to Katha Upanishad 2.5.15, a passage intermediate between the two passages about the Angushtamatra, which speaks of a primary light that cannot mean anything but Brahman. The sutra has in that case to be translated as follows, quote, the Angushtamatra is Brahman because in a passage intervening between the two a light is seen to be mentioned which can be Brahman only, end quote. The three last sutras of the Pada are, according to Shankara, to be divided into two Adhikaranas. Sutra 41 deciding that the ether which reveals names and forms is not the elemental ether but Brahman, and 42-43 teaching that the Vijnana Maya, quote, he who consists of knowledge, end quote, of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 4.3.7 is not the individual soul but Brahman. According to Ramanuja, the three sutras make up one single Adhikarana, discussing whether the Chandogya Upanishad passage about the ether refers to Brahman or to the individual soul in the state of release. The latter of these two alternatives being suggested by the circumstance that the released soul is the subject of the passage immediately preceding, quote, shaking off all evil as a horse shakes off his hair, end quote, etc. Sutra 41 decides that, quote, the ether is Brahman because the passage designates the nature of something else, end quote, etc., that is, of something other than the individual soul, other because to the soul the revealing of names and forms cannot be ascribed, etc. But an objection is raised. Does not more than one scriptural passage show that the released soul and Brahman are identical, and is not therefore the ether which reveals names and forms the soul as well as Brahman? The two, Sutra 42 replies, are different, quote, because in the states of deep sleep and departing, the highest self is designated as different, end quote, from the soul, which point is proved by the same scriptural passages which Shankara adduces, and, quote, because such terms as Lord and the like, end quote, cannot be applied to the individual soul. Reference is made to 4.4.14, where all Jagadvyapara is said to belong to the Lord only, not to the soul even when in the state of release. Pada 4. The last pada of the first Adhyaya is specially directed against the Shankyas. The first Adhikarana discusses the passage Katha Upanishad 1, 3, 10, 11, where mention is made of the great and the undeveloped, both of them terms used with a special technical sense in the Shankya Shastra, avyakta being a synonym for pradhana. Shankara shows by an exhaustive review of the topics of the Katha Upanishad that the term avyakta has not the special meaning which the Shankyas attribute to it, but denotes the body, more strictly the subtle body, sukshma sarira, but at the same time the gross body also, insofar as it is viewed as an effect of the subtle one. Adhikarana 2 demonstrates, according to Shankara, that the tricolored aja spoken of in Shvetashvatara Upanishad 4-5 is not the pradhana of the Shankyas, but either that power of the Lord from which the world springs, or else the primary causal matter first produced by that power. What Ramanuja, in contradistinction from Shankara, understands by the primary causal matter follows from the short sketch given above of the two systems. Adhikarana 3 shows that the Pankya Pankajana mentioned in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 4.4.17 are not the 25 principles of the Shankyas. Adhikarana 4 proves that scripture does not contradict itself on the all-important point of Brahman, that is, a being whose essence is intelligence, being the cause of the world. Adhikarana 5 is, according to Shankara, meant to prove that, quote, he who is the maker of those persons of whom this is the work, end quote, mentioned in Kaushitaki Upanishad 4.19, is not either the vital air or the individual soul, but Brahman. The subject of the Adhikarana is essentially the same in Ramanuja's view. Greater stress is, however, laid on the Adhikarana being polemical against the Shankyas, who wish to turn the passage into an argument for the pradhana doctrine. The same partial difference of view is observable with regard to the next Adhikarana, which decides that the, quote, self to be seen, to be heard, end quote, etc., is the highest self, not the individual soul. This latter passage also is, according to Ramanuja, made the subject of discussion in order to rebut the Shankya who is anxious to prove that what is there inculcated as the object of knowledge is not a universal self, but merely the Shankya Purusha. Adhikarana 7 teaches that Brahman is not only the efficient or operative cause, nimitta, of the world, but its material cause as well. The world springs from Brahman by way of modification, parinama. Ramanuja views this Adhikarana as specially directed against the Seshvara Shankyas, who indeed admit the existence of a highest Lord, but postulate in addition an independent pradhana on which the Lord acts as an operative cause merely. Adhikarana 8 remarks that the refutation of the Shankya views is applicable to other theories also, such as the doctrine of the world having originated from atoms. After this rapid survey of the contents of the first Adhyaya and the succinct indication of the most important points in which the views of Shankara and Ramanuja diverge, we turn to a short consideration of two questions which here naturally present themselves, namely, firstly, which is the principle on which the Vedic passages referred to in the sutras have been selected and arranged, and secondly, if, where Shankara and Ramanuja disagree as to the subdivision of the sutras into adhikaranas and the determination of the Vedic passages discussed in the sutras, there are to be met with any indications enabling us to determine which of the two commentators is right. The more general question as to how far the sutras favor either Shankara's or Ramanuja's general views cannot be considered at present. The Hindu commentators here and there attempt to point out the reason why the discussion of a certain Vedic passage is immediately followed by the consideration of a certain other one. Their explanations, which have occasionally been referred to in the notes to the translation, rest on the assumption that the Sutrakara, in arranging the texts to be commented upon, was guided by technicalities of the Mimamsa system, especially by a regard for the various so-called means of proof which the Mimamsaka employs for the purpose of determining the proper meaning and position of scriptural passages. But that this was the guiding principle is rendered altogether improbable by a simple tabular statement of the Vedic passages referred to in the first Adhyaya, such as given by Deussen on page 130. For from the latter it appears that the order in which the sutras exhibit the scriptural passages follows the order in which those passages themselves occur in the Upanishads, and it would certainly be a most strange coincidence if that order enabled us at the same time to exemplify the various pramanas of the Mimamsa in their due systematic succession. As Deusson's statement shows, most of the passages discussed are taken from the Chandogya Upanishad, so many indeed that the whole first Adhyaya may be said to consist of a discussion of all those Chandogya passages, of which it is doubtful whether they are concerned with Brahman or not, passages from the other Upanishads being brought in wherever an opportunity offers. Considering the prominent position assigned to the Upanishad mentioned, I think it likely that the Sutrakara meant to begin the series of doubtful texts with the first doubtful passage from the Chandogya, and that hence the sixth Adhikarana, which treats of the Anandamaya mentioned in the Taittiriya Upanishad, has, in agreement with Ramanuja's views, to be separated from the subsequent Adhikaranas and to be combined with the preceding ones, whose task it is to lay down the fundamental propositions regarding Brahman's nature. The remaining Adhikaranas of the first pada follow the order of passages in the Chandogya Upanishad, and therefore call for no remark, with the exception of the last Adhikarana, which refers to a Kaushitaki passage, for whose being introduced in this place I am not able to account. The first Adhikarana of the second pada returns to the Chandogya Upanishad. The second one treats of a passage in the Katha Upanishad where a being is referred to which eats everything. The reason why that passage is introduced in this place seems to be correctly assigned in the Sri Bhashya, which remarks that, as in the preceding sutra, it had been argued that the highest self is not an enjoyer. A doubt arises whether by that being which eats everything the highest self can be meant. The third Adhikarana again, whose topic is the, quote, two entered into the cave, end quote, appears, as Ramanuja remarks, to come in at this place owing to the preceding Adhikarana. For if it could not be proved that one of the two is the highest self, a doubt would attach to the explanation given above of the eater, since the, quote, two entered into the cave, end quote, and the eater stand under the same prakarana, and must therefore be held to refer to the same matter. The fourth Adhikarana is again occupied with a Chandogya passage. The fifth Adhikarana, whose topic is the ruler within, Antaryamin, manifestly owes its place, as remarked by Ramanuja also, to the fact that the Vedic passages treated had been employed in the preceding Adhikarana for the purpose of strengthening the argument. The sixth Adhikarana, again, which discusses, quote, that which is not seen, end quote, adresya, is clearly introduced in this place because in the preceding Adhikarana it had been said that adrishta, etc., denote the highest self. The reasons to which the last Adhikarana of the second pada and the first and third Adhikaranas of the third pada owe their places are not apparent. The second Adhikarana of the third pada treats of a Chandogya passage. The introduction, on the other hand, of the passage from the Prasna Upanishad treating of the Akshara Omkara is clearly due to the circumstance that an Akshara of a different nature had been discussed in the preceding Adhikarana. The fifth and sixth Adhikaranas investigate Chandogya passages. The two next sutras are, as remarked above, considered by Shankara to constitute a new Adhikarana treating of the, quote, being after which everything shines, end quote, while Ramanuja looks on them as continuing the sixth Adhikarana. There is one circumstance which renders it at any rate probable that Ramanuja, and not Shankara, here hits the intention of the author of the sutras. The general rule in the first three padas is that, wherever a new Vedic passage is meant to be introduced, the subject of the discussion, that is, that being which in the end is declared to be Brahman, is referred to by means of a special word, in most cases a nominative form. From this rule there is in the preceding part of the Adhyaya only one real exception, namely in 1.2.1, which possibly may be due to the fact that there a new pada begins, and it therefore was considered superfluous to indicate the introduction of a new topic by a special word. The exception supplied by 1.3.19 is only an apparent one, for, as remarked above, Sutra 19 does not in reality begin a new Adhikarana. A few exceptions occurring later on will be noticed in their places. Now neither Sutra 22 nor Sutra 23 contains any word intimating that a new Vedic passage is being taken into consideration, and hence it appears preferable to look upon them, with Ramanuja, as continuing the topic of the preceding Adhikarana. This conclusion receives an additional confirmation from the position of the next Adhikarana, which treats of the being, quote, a span long, end quote, mentioned in Katha Upanishad 2.4.12. For the reason of this latter passage being considered here is almost certainly the reference to the Alpasruti in Sutra 21, and, if so, the Angushtamatra properly constitutes the subject of the Adhikarana immediately following on Adhikarana 5.6, which in its turn implies that Sutras 22-23 do not form an independent Adhikarana. The two next Adhikaranas are digressions and do not refer to special Vedic passages. Sutra 39 forms a new Adhikarana according to Shankara, but not according to Ramanuja, whose opinion seems again to be countenanced by the fact that the sutra does not exhibit any word indicative of a new topic. The same difference of opinion prevails with regard to Sutra 40, and it appears from the translation of the sutra given above, according to Ramanuja's view, that Jyoti need not be taken as a nominative. The last two Adhikaranas finally refer, according to Ramanuja, to one Chandogya passage only, and here also we have to notice that Sutra 42 does not comprise any word intimating that a new passage is about to be discussed. From all this we seem entitled to draw the following conclusions. The Vedic passages discussed in the three first padas of the Vedanta Sutras comprise all the doubtful, or at any rate all the more important doubtful, passages from the Chandogya Upanishad. These passages are arranged in the order in which the text of the Upanishad exhibits them. Passages from other Upanishads are discussed as opportunities offer, there being always a special reason why a certain Chandogya passage is followed by a certain passage from some other Upanishad. Those reasons can be assigned with sufficient certainty in a number of cases, although not in all, and from among those passages whose introduction cannot be satisfactorily accounted for, some are eliminated by our following the subdivision of the sutras into Adhikaranas adopted by Ramanuja, a subdivision countenanced by the external form of the sutras. End of section 3.